This is Focus on Africa from BBC World News. I'm Sophie Ikenye. Our top stories. Ghanaians rush to the bank to try to salvage some of their savings after 23 savings and loans companies are shut down by the central bank. In the dock, Sudan's ousted president Omar al-Bashir appears in court for the start of his trial on corruption charges. Also in the program, cooking for 75 hours. A Kenyan cook attempts to beat a Guinness World Record. We meet a self-taught Kenyan chef. And in sport, the 19th edition of the Africa Games kicks off in Morocco today. 17 of the sports on show will be Olympic qualifiers. Thanks for joining us on Focus on Africa from BBC World News. There have been some serious concerns over money in Ghana. Money trapped in the latest wave of closures enforced by the Central Bank of Ghana. 23 savings and loans companies were shut down on Friday in an ongoing crackdown on institutions that don't have enough money to give should everyone want to withdraw their money at once. Now, the institutions disagree with the Bank of Ghana. The amounts involved total as much as $1.6 billion. Well, we've been speaking to some people who've been trying to get their money back.
I never expected anything like that to happen. When I heard the news, I was really worried. I'm a single parent and my rent is due. I'm very worried. Now that they have promised to pay, they should pay it quickly. I hustle under this scorching sun to make money. It's not easy. I don't think I will invest in any financial institution again.
I heard the Bank of Ghana revoked their license. I went to the place where I had invested my money to confirm. They said it's true and gave me a form to fill, so that I've claimed my money back. Now, I'm just hoping they'll pay.
I'm happy that they've asked us to come and fill in some forms so that we can get our money back. I'm hoping that they pay the money because I want to invest it in my business.
Well, let's speak to Daniel Darzi, a journalist with Ghana's Joy FM. Thanks for taking time to talk to us on Focus on Africa. What triggered this action by the Bank of Ghana?
Well, Sophie, what we need to know is that the Bank of Ghana has closed down 418 different financial institutions since 2017. When this announcement was made of the 23 savings and loans companies on Friday, a number of reasons were given. Now, some of them were that, first of all, they were low on capital. That meant that they didn't have enough money to gift their customers who were going to withdraw their monies. Some of this was because of the kind of loans they gave out. They said that they gave out the loans without due recourse to due process. Some of these loans were also investments put in personal projects and related parties to the owners of these institutions. And they said there were some persistent regulatory breaches. That is, they didn't follow the rules of the Bank of Ghana in handling their business. There were a number of other reasons, but these are the main ones.
The main reasons. But was there no other way of helping these institutions as opposed to just, shutting them down?
Like I said earlier, since 2017, this conversation has been ongoing, and analysts have been proffering various solutions other than closure of these banks. The most popular among them has been that governments should settle their indebtedness because, some of these banks and savings and loans companies lended monies to contractors who had been hired by government and have not been paid yet by government.
And is it clear when, that's a question most people are asking, when are we going to get back our money and can the government afford it?
Well, the government has been assuring the public that they would support, the Bank of Ghana to help them get their monies back. What we need to know is that since this process began, some 14 billion cedis, that is some $2.5 billion, has been borrowed by government in the form of a bond to cover some of these costs.
So they might be able to do it. I'm just wondering what would happen now to the stakeholders, the shareholders, people who have either invested in these institutions, are they accountable at all?
If you cast your mind back to the reasons I gave for these closures in the first place, a lot of fingers were pointed at these shareholders, these stakeholders, some of the management members of these companies. And since 2017, investigations have been ongoing. In fact, the Economic and Organized Crime Office, EOCO, of Ghana actually completed a batch of these and sent a docket to the Attorney General for prosecution. That was months ago. Those prosecutions have not started.
Daniel Dazi, it will be very interesting to see how this unfolds. Thank you for your time. Thank you. Now, Sudan's ousted President Omar al-Bashir has appeared in court to face trial on corruption charges. Mr. al-Bashir was overthrown in April after months of protests, bringing an end to his nearly 30 years in power. He's facing charges related to possessing foreign currency, corruption, and receiving gifts illegally. The BBC's Sally Nabil was outside court in Khartoum.
In a heavily secured convoy, the former Sudanese president arrived at court. Video cameras were not allowed inside. We barely managed to get a glimpse of Omar al-Bashir, Sudan's longest-serving president. This, his first session, is quite a procedural one. He's being tried on corruption charges. After nearly an hour, Mr. al-Bashir was driven back to prison in exactly the same convoy.
The former president has left court a short while ago, and you can see a heated discussion behind me between the lawyers, some of those who are against him and others who support him. Many Sudanese have been dreaming of seeing Bashir in the dock, but some of them tell me that this man should be accused of far more serious crimes and not just corruption charges.
A few days before the trial, I met Hossam, an activist who was detained for 3 months during the revolution. He was released on the day Mr. al-Bashir stepped down.
Charges of corruption are only a drop in the sea. His crimes include genocide and ethnic cleansing and crimes against humanity in Darfur, the Blue Nile and South Kordofan.
But supporters of the former president believe otherwise.
This trial is politicized. The current military council wants to win over protesters by trying Bashir. Those military rules should be tried with him too. They were part of his political entourage to the very last hours until they gave up on him.
Protesters say remnants of his regime are still there in the judiciary and wonder if he can receive a fair trial. Sally Nabil, BBC News, Khartoum.
Well, let's bring in Ahmed Kadouda, a Sudan analyst at George Washington University. Thank you for taking time to talk to us on this program. Now, when we hear arguments that Mr. al-Bashir will not be condemned in this particular case because he did what he did when he was president and had immunity, does that wash?
I don't think so. I think there are significant factors that people aren't taking into account. Most importantly, the fact that the new government that's coming into office within the next couple of days will have significant pressure to try Bashir on far more serious crimes. I think the fact that the Sudanese government during his reign refused to actually acknowledge any of the charges against President Bashir will force the new administration to take those charges up in more serious fashion.
So are we likely to see more serious charges or more serious cases, and under what conditions?
So the most important factor here is that of the International Criminal Court, of course. The ICC issued an arrest warrant to President Bashir in 2009. Now, that arrest warrant was issued because the government was obviously unwilling to try the president. But now the new government will have to make a decision if it's going to actually take up those charges more seriously. Interestingly, the Sudanese government in 2003 under Bashir actually amended the Sudanese criminal code to include crimes against humanity and war crimes, these international crimes that fall under the purview of the International Criminal Court. This, of course, was done to mitigate against the ICC. But at this stage, the Sudanese government has the, obviously, interest to make sure that Bashir is tried. But another important factor, of course, is going to be the crimes that were committed after Bashir was toppled. It's worth mentioning that the Transitional Military Council, which is now part of this new dispensation of power, actually is accused and is accused of being culpable in the massacres that have happened, which killed over 100 people, for example, on June 3rd. So this will be a bigger question for the government as well.
A lot of people are looking at this as quite positive. It's a step forward. But is that the general feeling in Sudan itself? And, you know, seeing the former president, ousted president, despite all these allegations, in the dock?
Yeah, I think most people seeing the president behind bars, facing crimes, now many would say are not the most egregious crimes he's committed, is actually a victory in and of itself. Now, President Bashir was a very brutal autocrat. He repressed his opposition and those who dissented. I think it sends a clear signal to the Sudanese people that there is certainly a new order. But at the same time, I think there will be a lot of calls for the crimes of genocide, international crimes, to be raised against him. At the same time, I think the big question for the new government will be whether it'll be able to actually round up all of those who have been culpable in crimes against humanity and war crimes and, of course, the civil wars that have happened. At the same time, Sudan has never actually dealt with its past. We've had over 50 or 60 years of civil war, egregious atrocities committed by both democratic and autocratic regimes in the country, but nobody's actually faced power. This is truly a change from the past.
All right, Ahmed Kaduda, thank you for taking time to talk to us on Focus on Africa. Thank you. Well, let's now take a quick look at other stories making headlines across Africa and the rest of the world. There has been a heavy security forces deployment in Zimbabwe's second city of Bulawayo in an effort to prevent an anti-government demonstration. Soldiers and police on horseback and in trucks patrolled the streets, warning people not to join the banned protests. The opposition movement for democratic change called for the demonstration to protest against the worsening economic crisis and the jailing of a local government critic. There are warnings that little has been done to combat measles outbreak in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Despite a national epidemic being declared in June, the medical charity Doctors Without Borders say more than 2,700 people have died from measles between January and August. That's higher than the total for Ebola in the past year. This is Focus on Africa from BBC World News. Still to come, could Nigeria's men miss out in this month's Basketball World Cup? Peter has the details in sport. I'm Sophie Ikenya and you're watching Focus on Africa from BBC World News. The top story on this program: Ghanaians have been rushing to the bank to try and salvage some of their savings under 23 savings and loans companies that were shut down by the central bank. You're watching BBC Focus on Africa. Let's find out what's happening in the world of sport, Peter.
Many thanks, Sophie. Lots to get through today, so we'll get cracking. The Africa Games officially begin today in Morocco in what is largely seen as a test run for the country's ambition to host the Olympics for the first time in Africa. Over 6,000 athletes from all 54 member states of the African Union have gathered to compete across nearly 30 sports disciplines. Some of the competitions will also serve as Olympic qualifiers. The BBC's Ferdinand Omondi is in Rabat.
This is a day that Moroccans have really been looking forward to. For the first time in the history of the All Africa Games, all 54 member states will be participating, and Rabat is getting to be the host city only 2 years after Morocco was readmitted into the African Union after leaving 30 years ago over a diplomatic tiff with the union for recognizing Western Sahara as a nation. That tiff is still there, but they are back in the union, and so this is a very significant moment for the people of Morocco. It is also being widely perceived as a dress rehearsal for this nation's ability to host major tournaments. Morocco has bid a record 6 times to hold the World Cup, and they have been unsuccessful, and already they have been invited to bid for 2030. Also, they have stated their intentions to host the Olympics one time and to bid for it. So if they do get successful, then that will be the first time the Olympics have ever been held in Africa. This is also a very important event for athletes, because in all the disciplines being held here, at least 15 will be used as Olympic qualifiers.
Now, the Men's Basketball World Cup starts on August the 31st in China. The 32 teams taking part qualified for the event over the past couple of years and were randomly drawn into one of 8 different 4-team groups. The top 2 finishers in each group will advance to the second round. Nigeria was the first team to qualify, but the Tigers run the risk of not making it to the tournament. That's because money has not been released for the trip, as their coach told BBC Sport Africa.
As of now, we're a little bit stranded with our funding from the ministry. If they can release it and make our job a lot easier, that will help us a lot. We're here in Nigeria, and we're already short-handed with our funding. So I think if they can help the federation, and so they can help us, so we can prepare adequately to go to China and represent Nigeria and have a chance to compete at a very high level and be on the medal podium at the end of the tournament. I think we have a chance to do it if we have the right preparation.
Well, no such problems for Nigeria's women's team as they retain the women's AfroBasket title after a 60-55 win over Senegal in Tagar. It's the second time the Tigresses are claiming back-to-back titles after their wins in 2003 and 2005. And in rugby, South Africa's women booked their place in the 2021 Women's World Cup in New Zealand with a 39-0 victory over Kenya in the deciding match of the qualifiers at the weekend. The win marked a clean sweep for the Springbok women in the competition and wrapped up a full house of points from their 3 matches following 89-5 and 73-0 victories against Uganda and Madagascar earlier in the tournament. And their coach says qualification was all down to hard work.
They worked very hard, I must say. We've actually put them through a very grueling conditioning block that we had. So, look, they deserve it. They played some very good rugby, scored some very good tries. So, pleased.
Football now, and the sports governing body FIFA has released the 10-man shortlist for this year's Puskás Award. This is the award for the best goal scored in the past season. Among the nominees is Cameroon's Ajara Nshut for her goal in the just-concluded Women's World Cup against New Zealand. She is joined on the list of candidates by Zlatan Ibrahimovic for his flicked volley against with LA Galaxy and Lionel Messi for his delicate chip against Real Betis. The winner will be revealed at the Best FIFA Football Award ceremony in Milan on September the 23rd. Sophie, that's up to speed with your sports.
Indeed I am, Peter. Thank you. Thank you. Let's now return to Ghana, and because the Ghana Revenue Authority, that's the GRA, has launched a mobile app that's aimed at cracking down on manufacturers and importers who, it says, tries to evade tax. Now, the app is called the Ghana Tax Stamp Authenticator. It allows consumers to scan and validate the excise tax stamps placed on alcohol, water, soda and tobacco to check the genuineness of products sold in shops. Well, the BBC's Thomas Nardi reports from Accra.
These products have been confiscated by the task force of the Ghana Revenue Authority. Some of the products, like this one, has a fake tax stamp. Others don't have the stamps at all, which means importers attempted to avoid tax. The problem is now widespread to the extent that the authorities want consumers to assist them to enforce the law. The Ghana Tax Stamp Authenticator app is one of such initiatives.
Some of them have the same serial numbers, but the stamps coming from GRA, each of them has a peculiar serial number. We also have some security features that are not visible to the naked eye. They are covered. So the stamps, by looking at them, you cannot see whether they are fake or not. And that is why we have introduced this app.
I've just bought this bottle of water from this shop. I'm going to scan it to determine whether it's a genuine product or not. The process begins with a tap on the logo. Then the start page will open. You tap on the start page and point the product where the tax stamp is placed directly under the scanner and wait for a few seconds. Okay, we have some results here. It will give you the product type, which is water, product origin, whether the product is manufactured locally or internationally. And here we have domestic, and then the human readable code, which will match with the one on the product. And then it's exactly the same code we have on this bottle. It's a very simple process, and if a fake product or stamp is identified, the consumer is expected to report to the nearest Ghana Revenue Authority office or any of the regulatory agencies for immediate action. The tax stamps were introduced last year to help authorities monitor the exact quantities of products manufacturers and importers declare for tax purposes. But some traders have started using fake stamps to avoid taxes. Offenders could face a maximum of 5 years imprisonment and a fine of up to 3 times the amount of taxes of the quantity of the products confiscated. Thomas Nadi, BBC News, Accra.
Now, take a look at this. It was one of the largest mangrove restoration programs in the world. In 2009, more than 100,000 Senegalese villagers planted leaves in an area larger than Paris. A decade later, this is the result. Residents are confident that the reforestation has improved the village environment and living conditions for their children. The BBC's Louise Duvast reports.
Here you have a burgeoning leaf. You take it and you plant it. Then you walk 1 step, 2 steps, and you plant another one. And everything here was planted like that.
Keeping it simple. For environmentalist Aida Helali, that has been key to the success of this large reforestation project. Ali, who was once Minister for the Environment, sees big. He's already replanted a surface larger than Paris.
I think we have a lot to catch up on. If we had started in the 80s, today we would have replanted thousands and thousands. Well, we have planted 15,000 hectares, or 150 million buds in more than 400 villages.
Much of this reforestation has been funded by multinational companies who hope to make money from capturing thousands of tons of CO2. Mangroves also regulate the level of salt water, so when the trees disappear, rice fields die, like in Siganar. In this area, replantation efforts have failed. Young people from the village are left with little to eat and little to do. Over 10 years, though, most replantation efforts do appear to have worked. Just outside the main city of Ziguinchor, we meet farmer Yaya Jata. For the first time, he's hoping to produce rice in this field.
These leaves, they act as fertilizers. For the fish that I catch, some of it is for my family and the rest is for sale. It also creates employment for my wife who sells the fish.
Some women with more mouths to feed venture further into the swamps.
Mr. Jata says these women were taught about the importance of the mangroves, how to cut wood and farm oysters sustainably, but illegal logging and overfishing remain the main threat to the mangroves.
When mangroves disappear, there is less fish to be found. So the need to safeguard this project is real to provide for future generations. Louise Doast, BBC News, Casamance.
It's beautiful. Now, before we go, a look at some rather mouth-watering food. Kenyan chef Malika Mohammed cooked for 75 hours in the hope of setting a new world record for the longest time spent cooking. Malika Mohammed, who lives in the coastal city of Mombasa, started cooking on Thursday at 10 a.m. and was done on Sunday at 1 p.m. local time. If verified by Guinness World Records, she'll have beaten the official record set by a U.S. chef, Ricky Lumpkin, who cooked for just over 68 hours. Malika prepared 400 dishes, including local and international recipes, most of which she offered to shelters and orphanages. That's all from Focus on Africa. Thanks for your company. Bye.